Welcome back to our channel. They tell you Hollywood is built on stardust, but look closer and you'll see the foundation is poured in blood. On the surface, Phyllis McGuire was the pristine face of American pop culture, a church choir angel draped in white. But backstage, that angel belonged to Sam Giancana, a monster who didn't sign autographs. He signed death warrants. This isn't just a love story gone wrong. It is the grotesque reality of show business stripped bare, proving that behind every glittering marquee lies a graveyard, and the price of fame is often paid in silence to the mob. But before the blood and the glitter mixed, they lived in two different worlds that should never have touched, separated by a moral abyss, yet destined to collide. Phyllis McGuire was the minister's daughter from Ohio, the center of the wholesome McGuire Sisters, America's musical manicures, who sang away post-war anxiety with perfect harmonies. While Phyllis was singing hymns, Sam Giancana was perfecting murder on the streets of Chicago. A certified psychopath rejected by the army but embraced by the mob, Sam rose from a teenage driver to the shark-skin suited boss of the outfit. By 1960, he had conquered the underworld and had the CIA in his pocket. But he was bored. He didn't want a gun mall. He wanted a trophy that proved he had class. The collision course was set for Las Vegas, where the McGuire sisters were reigning as the $50,000 a week queens of the Desert Inn. Sam Giancana was in the audience. He sat at table 1, the boss's table. He wasn't there for the music. He was there because he owned a piece of the hotel. He watched Phyllis McGuire. He saw the energy. He saw the diamonds she wore, diamonds she had bought herself with her own hard-earned money. He saw a woman who was powerful in her own right, but who was trapped in a cage of propriety. Sam didn't approach her with a pickup line. He approached her with leverage. In the neon-soaked purgatory of 1960s Las Vegas, where time dissolved into a blur of spinning wheels and clinking ice, Phyllis McGuire had a secret that was rotting the foundation of her pristine image. The saint of Middletown, Ohio, the smiling center of the angelic McGuire Sisters trio, nurtured a vice that was dark, consuming, and entirely at odds with the hymns she had been raised on. She loved to gamble, but love is too soft a word for the pathology that gripped her. It was a hunger, a desperate need to feel the razor's edge of risk. She didn't just play the slots, feeding quarters into machines like a bored tourist. She inhabited the high-stakes pits of roulette and baccarat, the roped-off arenas where fortunes were made and incinerated in seconds. She played with a manic intensity that terrified her managers, a feverish, dilated pupil focus that suggested the applause of the crowd was no longer enough to make her feel alive. In the windowless vacuum of the casino, it is very easy to lose a year's salary in a night. The chips are abstract. They are just colored plastic, divorced from the reality of sweat and labor. Phyllis, chasing a high that kept retreating, had run up a marker, a big one. It was a catastrophic sum, spiraling into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, a debt that could not only bankrupt her, but shatter the carefully cultivated, squeaky clean brand of the McGuire Sisters forever. She was a star on the marquee, but in the manager's office, she was a liability, a woman drowning in a sea of green felt. This was the opening Sam needed. He had been watching from the shadows, a predator observing the limp of a wounded gazelle. He didn't offer to pay it off as a favor. Favors imply gratitude. And Sam wasn't interested in something as fleeting as thanks. He took care of it as a transaction. He walked into the back offices where the real power resided, rooms where he held more sway than the legitimate owners, and with a simple nod, he made the debt disappear. He bought her marker. He purchased her vulnerability. In the brutal, transactional, arithmetic of the Chicago outfit. When a man like Sam Giancana erases your debt, the ledger isn't cleared. It is transferred. You don't owe him money anymore. You owe him you. It was an acquisition of property, executed with the cold precision of a corporate hostile takeover. He moved in immediately. It wasn't a courtship. It was a siege. It was a military occupation of a human being. Sam didn't woo her. He annexed her. When Phyllis walked off stage, breathless and sweating under the hot lights, Sam was there in the wings, a dark, immovable object blocking her path. When she went to dinner, Sam was there at the head of the table, his eyes tracking her every movement, his presence sucking the oxygen out of the room. He surrounded her. He used the immense, terrifying machinery of the Mafia to create a bubble around her, a hermetically sealed world where his word was law and his presence was absolute. He sent flowers, not by the dozen but by the truckload, filling her suite with so many roses that the scent became cloying, suffocating, a botanical display of sheer, overwhelming force that screamed dominance rather than affection. But these weren't just romantic gestures. They were displays of reach. They were reminders that his power had no boundaries, that he could touch her anywhere at any time. When Phyllis received a diamond bracelet worth $50,000, a glittering shackle of platinum and ice, she had to know on some level where that money came from. It didn't come from honest labor or wise investments. It came from the skim, the untaxed millions raked off the top of the casino counts before the IRS ever saw a dime. It came from the unions he squeezed until they bled dry. It came from the guys who got their knees broken with baseball bats in back alleys in Cicero and the bodies dissolving in barrels of acid in industrial basements. Every facet of those diamonds reflected a crime. By accepting them, by clasping them around her wrist, she was allowing him to drape her in the proceeds of his brutality. He was buying her soul, carat by carat, turning the icon of American innocence into a billboard for his untouchable wealth. Phyllis didn't run. That is the great mystery and the great tragedy of their union. Why didn't she run? She was rich in her own right. She was famous, beloved by a nation that saw her as a surrogate daughter. She could have hired an army of private security. She could have fled to Europe. She could have left Vegas and never looked back, but she stayed. She sat in the gilded cage he built and let him lock the door. Perhaps she was bored with the saint act, exhausted by the crushing pressure of being the perfect minister's daughter who never stepped out of line. Perhaps after years of being told to smile, wear white gloves, and be a good girl, the presence of a man who broke every rule God and man ever made was intoxicating. There is a seduction in absolute power, even when it is evil. Sam was dangerous in a way that the polished men of Hollywood could never be. He carried a gun not as a prop, but because it was a tool of his trade, as essential as a microphone was to her. He talked about people as if they were chess pieces to be removed from the board, lives to be extinguished with a phone call. He was the wolf, and she was the lamb who decided not to flee the den. She found a strange safety in the shadow of a monster, a thrill in the proximity to death. She looked at the blood on his hands and chose to hold them. For a woman who had lived her life in harmony, Sam was a fascinating discord. The affair began in the shadows of the desert inn. It was supposed to be a fling, a what happens in Vegas moment. But Sam was obsessive. He didn't want a fling. He wanted to own the McGuire sister. He wanted to take the girl on the Coca-Cola billboard and put her in his pocket. He wanted to show the world that Sam Giancana, the kid from the gutter, could sleep with America's sweetheart. He began to travel with her. He left his post in Chicago. He left his underbosses to run the rackets. He followed the McGuire sisters on tour. He was a constant, menacing presence in the front row. He terrified the other sisters. Christine and Dorothy saw what was happening. They saw the sharks circling their sister. They begged Phyllis to stop. They told her it would ruin the act. They told her it would ruin their lives. Phyllis ignored them. She was falling into the trap of the bad boy. She believed she could tame him. She believed that with her, Sam was different. She saw the man who cooked eggs for her in the morning, not the man who ordered an ice pick to the brain of a snitch in the afternoon. She fell in love with the mask, but the mask was slipping. The FBI was watching. J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, had an obsession with the Chicago outfit. When his agents reported that Sam Giancana was sleeping with Phyllis McGuire, Hoover didn't see a love story. He saw leverage. He saw a way to humiliate Sam and potentially a way to get to the Kennedys. The wiretaps were authorized, turning a tabloid scandal into a grotesque violation of human dignity. The FBI didn't just tap Sam's phone, they bugged the hotel rooms. They planted microphones in the lamps, in the headboards, in the walls. The reality was jarring. Phyllis McGuire, the woman who sang "Good Night, Sweetheart, Good Night," lay in the arms of a mass murderer, whispering her deepest fears and desires. And in a van outside, men in cheap suits were smoking cigarettes and laughing. They heard the sex. They heard the arguments. They heard Sam bragging about his power. They heard Phyllis complaining about her sisters. The agents gave the tapes names. They passed them around the office. It was voyeurism sanctioned by the state. Phyllis was stripped naked, not just by Sam, but by the government. She was collateral damage in a war she didn't understand. Sam knew he was being followed. He didn't care. In fact, he flaunted it. He took Phyllis to Europe. They went to London, Rome, Paris. It was a royal tour of the underworld. Sam treated Europe like his personal playground. He wanted to show Phyllis off to his international contacts. "Look what I have," he seemed to say. "I have the diamonds and I have the girl." But the cracks were forming. The press caught wind of it. A gossip columnist in Chicago dropped a blind item about a singing sister and a mob mister. The whispers started in the dressing rooms. Club owners, who usually bowed down to the McGuire sisters, started to get nervous. Booking agents hesitated. The brand, the wholesome, squeaky, clean brand, was being tainted. Phyllis tried to maintain the dual life. On stage, she was the saint. Off stage, she was the sinner. She started dressing differently. The high necklines dropped. The jewelry became flashier. She started wearing the blood diamonds Sam gave her. A ring here, a necklace there. She was wearing the evidence of his crimes. Every time the stage lights hit those diamonds, they sparkled with a brilliance that had been paid for in violence. Sam's control wasn't just built on gifts, it was built on fear. One night, a heckler at a club shouted something rude at Phyllis. It was a minor incident, the kind of thing performers deal with nightly. Sam was in the audience. He didn't shout back. He simply gestured to two men standing by the exit. The heckler was escorted out. He was never seen at that club again. The next day, the story circulated that the man had been beaten within an inch of his life in the parking lot. Phyllis heard the rumors. She asked Sam about it. Sam smiled, that cold reptilian smile, and said, "I just made sure he learned some manners, baby." This was the trap. Phyllis felt safe. She felt protected. No one could hurt her. But she failed to realize that the wall Sam built to keep the world out was also a wall that kept her in. She was no longer a free woman. She was the property of the Chicago outfit. She was a prize bird trapped in a velvet prison, and the exits were guarded by men with silencers on their pistols. The relationship deepened. Sam began to confide in her. This was the most dangerous part. He didn't tell her everything. He was too smart for that. But he told her enough. He talked about his frustrations with the commission. He talked about his dealings with Frank Sinatra. He complained about the Kennedy family. Sam had helped get John F. Kennedy elected. The Chicago outfit had delivered the Union vote in Illinois, swinging the 1960 election. Sam expected gratitude. He expected the government to back off. Instead, Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General, went to war against the mob. Sam felt betrayed. He ranted to Phyllis about the double-crossing Kennedys. Phyllis sat there nodding, absorbing secrets that could get her killed. She was becoming a repository of dangerous information. She wasn't just a singer anymore. She was a vault. And the FBI, listening to the tapes, realized that Phyllis McGuire was now a national security risk. The turning point came when the bubble burst publicly. The press couldn't ignore it anymore. The headlines screamed, "Phyllis and the Godfather." The juxtaposition was too good to pass up. The photo of Phyllis smiling and radiant next to the mugshot of Sam Giancana, looking like a shark in a suit. The public reaction was visceral. It wasn't just shock, it was betrayal. The mothers of America felt like Phyllis had lied to them. The sincerely girl was sleeping with the enemy. The radio station stopped playing McGuire Sisters records. The TV appearances were canceled. The Coca-Cola endorsement, the holy grail of validation, was pulled. Phyllis was stunned. She thought her talent would protect her. She thought the public loved her. She didn't realize they loved the image of her. Once the image was shattered, the love evaporated. Sam's reaction to the backlash was telling. He didn't apologize. He didn't offer to leave her to save her career. He doubled down. He told her, "You don't need them. You have me." It was the classic abuser's tactic. Isolate the victim until the abuser is the only source of validation left. Sam took her back to Chicago. He paraded her through the underworld haunts. The wise guys, the hit men, the loan sharks, they all stared at her. Some with lust, some with contempt. To them, she was just another broad, just another spoil of war. Phyllis sat in smoke-filled back rooms, surrounded by men discussing gambling lines and territory disputes, wearing a dress that cost $5,000. She was a queen in hell. The tension within the McGuire family reached a breaking point. Christine and Dorothy gave Phyllis an ultimatum. Leave Sam or the group is over. They couldn't work with the heat. They were being harassed by the FBI. Agents were showing up at their homes, asking questions about their sister. Phyllis looked at her sisters. These were the women she had shared a womb with, shared a life with. Then she looked at Sam. She chose Sam. It was a decision that defied logic, but aligned perfectly with the psychology of possession. Sam had made himself essential. He was the drug. Phyllis was addicted to the adrenaline, the danger, and the overwhelming, suffocating attention he provided. But the FBI wasn't done. They decided to turn up the heat. They subpoenaed Phyllis to testify before a grand jury in Chicago. They wanted to force her to talk about Sam's activities. This was the moment of truth. Phyllis McGuire, the minister's daughter, was going to have to place her hand on a Bible and choose between the law of the land and the code of the streets. The courtroom was packed. The press was in a frenzy. Phyllis arrived looking like a movie star in a funeral procession. She wore dark glasses. She walked past the cameras without a word. Inside the courtroom, the prosecutors hammered her. They asked about the trips to Europe. They asked about the money. They asked about the men Sam met with. Phyllis sat in the witness chair. She looked at the prosecutor. She thought about Sam, waiting for her. She thought about what happens to people who talk "I decline to answer," she said. She pleaded the Fifth Amendment. She pleaded it again and again. With every refusal, she hammered another nail into the coffin of her career. The public watched in horror. The saint wasn't just sleeping with the mob, she was protecting them. She was one of them now. Sam watched from the sidelines. He was proud. She stood tall. She kept her mouth shut. That was the ultimate test of loyalty in his world. She had passed. She was no longer just a civilian. She was an associate. She was his. But for Phyllis, the walk out of that courthouse was the loneliest walk of her life. She had protected Sam, but she had lost everything else. The applause was gone. The sisterhood was fractured. The only thing waiting for her was a limousine with tinted windows and a man who viewed her silence as a return on his investment. The heavy door of the limousine clicked shut, sealing Phyllis inside with her choice. But as the car pulled away from the courthouse steps, leaving the flashbulbs behind, the real verdict was being delivered not by a judge, but by the American public. She had survived the legal trap, but she was about to walk into a cultural execution. The silence that followed Phyllis McGuire's refusal to testify was deafening. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the sound of doors slamming shut all over Hollywood. The phone at the McGuire Sisters booking agency stopped ringing. The television networks, which had once fought over who got to broadcast the girls' Christmas special, suddenly found their schedules full. Major sponsors fled instantly. The corporate giants that had once fueled their wholesome image evaporated overnight. Middle America does not buy products from a woman who pleads the Fifth Amendment to protect a mob boss. Phyllis returned to the dressing room she shared with her sisters, Christine and Dorothy. The air was frigid. For a decade, they had been a single organism, breathing and moving in perfect synchronization. Now they were strangers. Christine looked at Phyllis not with anger, but with devastation. They had built an empire on harmony, and Phyllis had destroyed it for a man who killed people for a living. The act was over. The McGuire sisters, as a cultural force, were finished. They would play out their remaining contracts, but the magic was dead. The audience knew. They looked at the three women on stage and saw two victims and one accomplice. But Phyllis did not grieve the loss of her career. She was too busy being ushered into a new role, the first lady of the mob. Sam Giancana did not comfort her with apologies. He comforted her with escalation. He moved her into a world where the laws of gravity and the laws of the United States did not apply. He took her to the Cal Neva Lodge, a casino resort straddling the border of California and Nevada. It was owned by Frank Sinatra, the crown prince of entertainment and Sam's close friend. The Cal Neva was supposed to be a sanctuary. It was a playground for the Rat Pack, for Marilyn Monroe, for the Kennedys. It was a place where the booze flowed freely and the FBI wasn't supposed to look. But Sam was banned. The Nevada Gaming Control Board had a black book, a list of people forbidden from entering any casino in the state. Sam Giancana was at the top of that list. His presence was radioactive. Sam didn't care. He flew Phyllis in on a private plane. They stayed in Chalet 50, the most exclusive bungalow on the property. He wanted to show her that rules were for little people. He was Sam Giancana. He went where he pleased. For a few days, it was a paradise of sin. They drank expensive champagne by the pool. They watched Sinatra perform in the showroom. But the reality of Sam's life always crashed the party. A fight broke out. Sam, drunk and volatile, got into an altercation with the staff. He screamed at them. He threatened to burn the place down. His voice, usually a low rasp, rose to a terrifying shriek. The FBI was watching. They documented Sam's presence. They took photos. They sent the evidence to the gaming control board. The fallout was nuclear. Frank Sinatra, the biggest star in the world, lost his gaming license. He was forced to sell his share of the Calneva. He was humiliated, and he blamed Phyllis. In Sinatra's eyes, Sam was his friend, but Phyllis was the distraction, the loose end that had brought the heat. This incident at the Calneva was pivotal. It isolated Phyllis from the legitimate celebrity world entirely. Sinatra cut her off. The Rat Pack turned their backs. She was no longer one of the guys. She was Sam's girl, and Sam was poison. Back in Chicago, the mechanism of possession tightened. Sam didn't just want to be with Phyllis, he wanted to consume her. He moved her into a sprawling estate filled with museum-quality furniture, a monument to excess. He draped her in heavier jewels, a 10-carat diamond ring, a platinum necklace dripping with emeralds. But these weren't just gifts. They were dog tags. In Sam's world, adorning her in the proceeds of his rackets was a territorial display. He was telling the world, I can take the purest thing in America and drape it in my sins. But the luxury came with a price. The guard. Sam assigned men to watch her. He called it protection. Phyllis told herself it was necessary because Sam had enemies. But deep down she knew the truth. They weren't protecting her from assassins. They were protecting Sam from her freedom. These men, thick-necked, dead-eyed soldiers from the outfit, stood outside her dressing room. They drove her car. They sat at the next table when she had lunch with her mother. Phyllis McGuire was living in a prison without bars. If she wanted to go to the store, she had to ask. If she wanted to make a phone call, someone was listening. The protection was a velvet noose, and Sam held the end of the rope. He began to exhibit the classic traits of a paranoid narcissist. He accused her of looking at other men. He accused her of judging him. He would fly into rages, throwing lamps, screaming about loyalty. Then just as quickly the storm would pass, and he would be the charming, generous lover again, cooking pasta and pouring wine. This cycle of abuse, terror followed by tenderness, broke her will. She stopped trusting her own perception of reality and began to trust only Sam. She only trusted Sam. Meanwhile, the FBI's obsession with the couple crossed the line into perversion. J. Edgar Hoover, a man with his own deep-seated sexual neuroses, took a personal interest in the Giancana tapes. He wanted dirt. He wanted to know if Sam was talking about the Kennedy assassination plots. He wanted to know if Sam was talking about the CIA. But the agents in the van were getting something else entirely. They were getting the soundtrack to a twisted domestic life. They recorded Phyllis crying. They recorded Sam snoring. They recorded the intimacy of the bedroom. The transcripts of these tapes, heavily redacted but still horrifyingly detailed, paint a picture of a relationship that was less Bonnie and Clyde and more Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? With guns. In one tape, Sam is heard berating Phyllis for her spending habits, sounding like a disgruntled suburban husband, only to pivot seamlessly to discussing a hit on arrival. "You think money grows on trees?" he shouted. "I gotta break 3 guys' legs to pay for those drapes." And Phyllis, desensitized to the violence, would simply reply, "But Sam, they match the carpet." The banal evil of their life was captured on magnetic tape. The agents listening didn't just record it, they weaponized it. They leaked details to the press. They made sure the tabloids knew about the fights, the gifts, the specific nature of their dysfunction. They wanted to humiliate Phyllis into leaving him. They underestimated her stubbornness. Or perhaps they underestimated her fear. The most dangerous aspect of their relationship, however, was not the domestic drama. It was the third man in the bed, the Central Intelligence Agency. Sam Giancana was leading a double life that even Phyllis didn't fully understand. While the FBI was hunting him, the CIA was hiring him. The U.S. government, desperate to remove Fidel Castro from power in Cuba, had turned to the Mafia. They wanted Sam to use his underworld connections in Havana to assassinate Castro. Phyllis was sleeping with a man who was technically working for the same government that was trying to put him in jail. Sam would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, smoking a cigar, and mutter about the boys in Langley. He would hint at operations that were so secret they didn't exist. He told Phyllis that he was untouchable because he was doing patriotic work. He believed he had a get-out-of-jail-free card. Phyllis absorbed this. It fed her delusion that Sam wasn't a criminal, but a misunderstood power broker. He's helping the country, she would tell herself. He's a patriot in his own way. It was a desperate rationalization, a mental gymnastic routine required to sleep next to a killer. But the CIA deal was rotting. Castro was still alive. The Kennedys were cracking down. Sam was becoming a liability to everyone. The FBI intensified the pressure. They started following Phyllis openly. They would park outside her house with the lights on. They would follow her to church. They wanted her to break. One Sunday, Phyllis came out of church in Las Vegas. An FBI agent stepped into her path. He didn't arrest her. He just smiled, a cold, bureaucratic smile, and said, "Nice sermon, Miss McGuire. Did you pray for Sam's soul? Because he's going to need it." It was a violation of the spiritual sanctuary, just as they had violated her bedroom. There was no place left for Phyllis to hide. God, the law, and the public had all turned their backs. In 1963, the pressure cooker exploded. President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. The world stopped. In the chaotic aftermath, the spotlight on the Mafia intensified. Conspiracy theories swirled. Did Sam do it? Did the CIA do it? Was it retaliation for the crackdown? Sam became the most scrutinized man in America. The Patriot defense evaporated. He was now just a suspect. The CIA cut ties. The FBI took off the gloves. Phyllis found herself living in a bunker. The estate in Oak Park was surrounded by reporters and agents. The phone lines were tapped so heavily you could hear the echo of your own voice. The romance was gone. It was just survival. Sam's behavior deteriorated. The stress of the scrutiny made him savage. He stopped being the charming lover. He became the boss full-time, even in the kitchen. He barked orders at Phyllis. He treated her like a soldier who was failing a mission. "You keep your mouth shut," he told her repeatedly. "You don't know nothing. You never saw nothing." He was coaching her for the inevitable. He knew the subpoenas were coming back. He knew the grand jury wasn't done with her. And Phyllis, the woman who once sang about sugar time, learned the code of omerta. She learned how to look at a prosecutor with dead eyes. She learned how to forget dates, times, and faces. She learned how to kill her own memory. The transformation was complete. The girl from Ohio was dead. In her place was a mob wife without the ring. She had traded her reputation for a front row seat to the collapse of the American underworld. One night, sitting in the living room of the estate, Sam turned to her. He was holding a glass of scotch, his hand shaking slightly, not from fear, but from rage. "They're going to try to kill me, Phil," he said. "Not the cops, our guys, the outfit. I'm too hot. I'm bringing too much heat." Phyllis froze. She looked at the man she had sacrificed everything for. He wasn't talking about prison. He was talking about execution. "What do we do?" she whispered. Sam looked at her, his eyes flat and hard. You do nothing. You keep singing. You keep smiling. Me? I gotta go away." He was planning his exile. He was going to Mexico. He was going to leave her behind to face the music. It was the ultimate betrayal of the romantic myth. Romeo wasn't going to drink the poison. He was going to catch a flight to Cuernavaca and leave Juliet to deal with the feds. Phyllis realized then that she was not his partner. She was his cover. She was the beautiful distraction that had kept the public occupied while he ran his business. Now that the business was collapsing, she was expendable, but she didn't leave him. Even as he packed his bags, even as he moved his money offshore, even as he prepared to abandon her to the wolves of the press and the FBI, she helped him pack. She folded his silk shirts. She polished his alligator shoes. Why? Because the possession was absolute. She didn't know how to exist in a world where Sam Giancana wasn't telling her what to do. She was a satellite that had lost its orbit, but she was still terrified of the dark void of space. Sam left for Mexico in 1966. Phyllis stayed in America. She was alone in the mansion, surrounded by the gold furniture and the wiretaps. The silence returned, but this time it was the silence of abandonment. She had the diamonds, she had the notoriety, but the man who had promised her the world had left her with nothing but a file at the FBI headquarters thick enough to stop a bullet. As Sam's plane climbed into the sky, heading south toward the border, Phyllis was left standing in the wreckage of her reputation. She thought the distance might save them, that the heat would die down if the Godfather was out of the picture. She was wrong. The chaos didn't end. It simply changed zip codes. Mexico was not a sanctuary. It was a waiting room for death. Sam Giancana settled in Cuernavaca, a city of eternal spring. But for him it was a season of rot. He bought a villa with high walls and iron gates. He hired guards. He tried to play the role of the retired gentleman. He gardened. He played golf. He wore expensive linen shirts and smoked cigars on the terrace, looking out at the mountains. But a shark cannot live in a swimming pool. Sam was a creature of the pavement, of the back room, of the hustle. In Mexico, stripped of his daily power, the silence began to eat him alive. Phyllis McGuire became his only tether to the world he had left behind. She became his primary link to the outside world. She didn't move to Mexico. She couldn't. Her life, her remaining shreds of a career, and her family were in the United States. So she began a ritual of transit that was exhausting and humiliating. She flew to Mexico City, then took a car to Cuernavaca. She did this dozens of times. Every time she stepped into an airport, she felt the eyes. The FBI knew where she was going. They tracked her flights. They watched her luggage. She was no longer just a singer. She was a mule for emotional contraband. When she arrived at the villa, the dynamic was grotesque. Sam wasn't grateful. He was suspicious. The paranoia that had sprouted in Chicago bloomed in the Mexican heat. He accused her of sleeping with other men in the States. He accused her of talking to the FBI. He demanded to know who she had seen, what she had said, why she was 5 minutes late. He checked the phone bills. He checked the odometers on the cars. He was a dictator of a kingdom of one, and Phyllis was his only subject. She endured it. Why? Because the alternative was admitting that she had thrown her life away for nothing. The weight of her sacrifice was a powerful trap. She had sacrificed the McGuire sisters, her reputation, and her innocence. If she left Sam now, she would be left with only the wreckage. So she doubled down. She played the dutiful wife to a man who wasn't her husband. She cooked for him. She listened to his rants about the Kennedys, about the CIA, about the ungrateful outfit bosses back in Chicago who were happy to see him gone. The FBI agents back in Chicago were frustrated. Sam was out of their reach. The Mexican authorities were being paid off. The extradition treaties were murky, so they squeezed Phyllis. They leaked stories to the press about her trips. They made sure the world knew that Phyllis McGuire was visiting the Godfather in exile. They turned her loyalty into a weapon against her. They wanted to shame her into breaking up with him. It didn't work. The shame only calcified her resolve. She developed a thick skin. She stopped reading the newspapers. She stopped caring what the public thought. She created a bubble where the only opinion that mattered was Sam's. But Sam was deteriorating. The exile was changing Chasechim. He wasn't the sharp shark-skin-suited boss anymore. He was becoming sloppy. He was becoming loud. In Cuernavaca, he started to act out. He got into fights on the golf course. He threw clubs at caddies. He screamed at the locals. He forgot that he was a guest in a foreign country. He forgot that his money could buy silence, but it couldn't buy respect. The outfit back in Chicago, Tony Accardo, Paul Ricca, the real heavyweights, were watching. They didn't like what they saw. A mob boss is supposed to be quiet. He is supposed to be invisible. Sam Giancana was a neon sign. His affair with Phyllis, his antics in Mexico, his constant need for attention, it was all heat. And in the Mafia, heat burns everyone. The bosses started to view Sam not as a leader in exile, but as a liability. Phyllis felt this shift. On her visit, she noticed the tension in Sam's guards. She noticed that the phone calls from Chicago were shorter, colder. Sam would slam the receiver down and curse Tony Accardo. "They think I'm finished," he would growl. "I made them. I built this city." Phyllis tried to soothe him. "But you cannot soothe a man who realizes his power is an illusion." Sam turned his rage on her. The verbal abuse escalated. He called her names that would make a sailor blush. He told her she was getting old. He told her she was nothing without him. He broke her down systematically, ensuring that her self-esteem was so low she wouldn't dare leave. Then, the specter of his past returned. The CIA investigations resurfaced. In 1974, the Senate Intelligence Committee began investigating the CIA's illegal activities, including the plots to assassinate Fidel Castro. The name Sam Giancana surfaced in the files. The government needed him. They didn't want him for gambling or racketeering anymore. They wanted him as a star witness. They wanted him to spill the dirty secrets of the U.S. government's alliance with the mob. This changed the calculus completely. Sam wasn't just a criminal fugitive. He was a holder of state secrets. The Mexican government, under pressure from the U.S., decided Sam had overstayed his welcome. One night in 1974, the Mexican police raided the villa in Cuernavaca. It wasn't a polite knock. They kicked in the doors. They dragged Sam out of bed in his pajamas. They didn't let him pack his silk suits. They threw him into a car and drove him to the border. They shoved him across the bridge into the waiting arms of the FBI. It was an ignominious end to the exile. The Don returned to America not as a conqueror, but as a deportee. He looked disheveled. He looked old. The cameras were waiting. The footage of Sam Giancana being led away in handcuffs, wearing rumpled clothes, was a stark contrast to the dapper image he had cultivated for decades. Phyllis was in Las Vegas when the news broke. Watching from her suite, she saw the man who once commanded armies now look frail, disoriented, like a confused grandfather. She didn't see a criminal. She saw a man who needed her, and once again, she ran to him. She got on a plane to Chicago, heading straight back into the fire. Sam was brought before a grand jury again. This time, the stakes were different. They offered him immunity. Immunity is a trap. If you have immunity, you cannot plead the Fifth Amendment. You have to talk. If you don't talk, you go to jail for contempt. If you do talk, the mob kills you. It was a death sentence either way. Sam chose silence. He refused to answer questions. The judge threw him in jail. For the next year, Phyllis McGuire's life was a series of prison visits. She went to the Cook County Jail. She sat in the waiting room with the wives of drug dealers and petty thieves. She wore her dark glasses and her fur coats, a relic of a glamorous era that had turned into a gritty reality show. Sam was not a good prisoner. He complained about the food. He complained about the mattress. But mostly he complained about the betrayal. He felt the outfit had abandoned him. He felt the government had double-crossed him. He was a bitter, angry man. Phyllis sat on the other side of the glass. She listened. She nodded. She smuggled him messages. She was the only person he trusted, yet he treated her like an employee. Get me a lawyer. Call this guy. Bring me cash. He never asked, how are you? He never asked, is your career okay? He didn't care. She was a tool. The prison stint took a toll on his health. He developed gallbladder issues. His blood pressure spiked. His lawyers argued for his release on medical grounds. In 1975, the judge relented. Sam was released. He went home to his bunker in Oak Park. The Oak Park house was less a home and more a mausoleum. Heavily draped and suffocatingly quiet, it became the final stage for Sam's unraveling. He retreated to the basement kitchen, engaging in a solitary routine of cooking and brooding. But the bravado of the Mexico days was gone. The outfit, now run by Tony Accardo and Joey Ayupa, viewed him not as a retired boss, but as a loose end. A loud, flashy liability who knew too much about the CIA and the Kennedys. When Phyllis visited, she didn't see the defiant godfather. She saw a man haunted by the certainty that the end was near. He didn't just suspect he was being watched. He seemed to differentiate between the cold gaze of the FBI and the predatory glare of his former associates. For the first time, the hunter had become the hunted. You should leave, Phil, he told her one night. Go back to Vegas. Don't come around here for a while. Was he trying to protect her, or was he pushing her away because he knew what was coming? Phyllis hesitated. She wanted to stay. She wanted to be the loyal soldier until the end. But the air in that house was thick with death. She could smell it. She left. She flew back to Las Vegas. It was the last time she would see him alive. The final act of the tragedy was set. On the warm summer night of June 19th, 1975, Sam was alone in his basement kitchen preparing his favorite comfort food, Italian sausage with escarole. The security system was off, a detail that has haunted investigators for decades. Sam Giancana, the most paranoid man in America, had left his guard down. Why? Because he knew the person coming to see him. It wasn't a stranger kicking down the door. It was a friend. At around 11 p.m., while Sam stood at the stove stirring the pan, the killer entered without a sound. A single .22 caliber bullet entered the back of Sam's head, dropping him to the linoleum floor. The killer didn't panic. With the cold efficiency of a butcher, he walked over to the fallen boss, turned him over, and fired 6 more shots specifically into the mouth and throat. It was a message written in lead and blood. In the Mafia, shooting someone in the mouth means one thing: ensure you never talk again. The echoes of the shots faded into the hum of the refrigerator. For hours, the most powerful mobster in Chicago was just a body cooling on the floor while the sausage and escarole burned on the stove. When police finally arrived, the air was thick with the scent of charred meat and gunpowder. They found the Godfather in his pajamas, reduced to forensic evidence. 7.22 caliber casings lay scattered like cigarette butts, a sloppy yet arrogant signature. The mouth that had threatened to talk to the Senate Intelligence Committee had been permanently closed. The FBI agents who arrived at the scene didn't mourn. They were frustrated. They tore the house apart. They weren't looking for the killer. They were looking for the files. They ripped open drawers, slashed mattresses, and pried up floorboards. They were hunting for the leverage Sam had claimed to possess, the proof of the CIA plots, the Kennedy connections, the dirty laundry of the American century. They found nothing. If the files existed, they were gone. Sam had played his final hand and lost, but he had taken his secrets to the grave. Phyllis McGuire watched the aftermath from a suite in Las Vegas. The television news played the footage of the body being wheeled out on a gurney. She saw the sheet covering his face. She didn't turn away. She had spent 15 years looking at the monster. She wasn't going to flinch now. The phone in her suite rang incessantly. It wasn't friends offering condolences. It was the press. It was the FBI. It was the lawyers. Everyone wanted a piece of the widow who wasn't a wife. She flew to Chicago for the funeral. It was a grotesque spectacle. The Holy Queen of Heaven Church was surrounded by a mob of photographers, federal agents, and curious onlookers. They pushed against the police barricades, hungry for a glimpse of the gangsters and the showgirls. Phyllis stepped out of a limousine, wearing dark glasses and a black veil. She walked a gauntlet of flashbulbs. The FBI agents stood openly in the crowd, snapping photos of everyone who shook her hand, updating their organizational charts of the Chicago outfit. She stood at the gravesite at Mount Carmel Cemetery. She watched the bronze casket descend into the earth. She was surrounded by men in silk suits who whispered out of the sides of their mouths. Some of them were undoubtedly the men who had ordered Sam's death. They threw flowers on the coffin. They kissed Phyllis on the cheek. It was a theater of hypocrisy. Phyllis accepted their condolences with a stone face. She knew the rules. You don't ask who did it. You don't ask why. You accept the silence. After the dirt was thrown, the reality of her position set in. Sam was gone, but the stain remained. The McGuire sisters were effectively dead as a commercial entity. The innocence that had been their trademark was buried in that grave with Sam. Phyllis was 44 years old. She was wealthy, she was famous, and she was radioactive. She retreated to Las Vegas. If she couldn't be America's sweetheart, she would be its eccentric recluse. She bought a massive estate in the Rancho Circle neighborhood. It wasn't a home, it was a fortress. She installed high walls and iron gates. She hired a private security force that rivaled the Secret Service. She installed bulletproof glass. The paranoia that had consumed Sam in his final years had infected her. She lived in anticipation of a hit that never came. Inside the mansion, she constructed a shrine to the life she had lost. The decor was a testament to the excess of the mob era. There was a replica of the Eiffel Tower in the living room. There was a moat with swans. There were rooms filled with the expensive, gaudy furniture Sam had bought her. It was a museum of guilt. She walked the halls alone, surrounded by the physical evidence of her corruption. She didn't purge Sam from her life. She canonized him. In interviews, she became his fiercest defender. When Barbara Walters asked her about the murders, about the crime, Phyllis looked into the camera with defiant eyes. "I don't regret loving him," she said. "He was good to me. I never saw him kill anyone." It was a masterclass in denial. She separated the man who cooked her eggs from the man who strangled his enemies with piano wire. She chose to remember the lover and forget the butcher. This was her survival mechanism. If she admitted he was a monster, she would have to admit she had slept with a monster. But the FBI wasn't done with her. Even after Sam's death, they kept the file open. They believed Phyllis knew where the missing money was. They believed she knew where the CIA documents were hidden. They hauled her back in front of grand juries. They harassed her at airports. They treated her not as a grieving woman, but as a vault that needed to be cracked. Phyllis held firm. She never talked. She never gave them a single name. She honored the code of omerta better than most of the made men in Chicago. Her life in Las Vegas became a crystal prison. She entertained lavishly, hosting parties for the few friends who stuck by her. She wore the diamonds Sam had given her, the 10-carat rings, the heavy necklaces. They were her armor. She flaunted them. It was a way of saying, "I survived." But the guests at her parties whispered. They looked at the jewels and wondered how much blood had been spilled to buy them. They looked at the high walls and wondered if they were designed to keep people out or keep Phyllis in. The McGuire sisters attempted a comeback in the 1980s. It was a nostalgia act. They played casinos and retirement communities. The harmonies were still there, but the context had changed. They were artifacts of a bygone era. The audience came to see the survivors. They came to stare at Phyllis, the woman who had touched the third rail of American crime and lived. The applause was polite, but it wasn't the adoration of the 1950s. The magic was gone. Phyllis lived out her remaining decades in that fortress. She became a caricature of the rich widow. She collected guns. She had a firing range in her basement. She told visitors that she was a crack shot. It was a chilling detail. The woman who had once sung gospel music was now practicing her aim with a .357 Magnum in her basement, preparing for a war that had ended 20 years ago. The loneliness was the true price of the affair. Sam had isolated her so thoroughly that she never really learned how to be with anyone else. She never remarried. She never had children. She had Sam's memory, and that was a jealous ghost. It occupied every room in her house. It sat at the head of the dining table. No other man could compete with the intensity of the Godfather. Normal relationships felt boring. Normal men felt weak. Sam had ruined her for ordinary happiness. In the end, the story of Phyllis McGuire and Sam Giancana is not a romance. It is a tragedy of transaction. Phyllis traded her reputation for protection, and Sam traded his security for a trophy. They both got what they wanted, and it destroyed them both. Phyllis McGuire passed away in 2020 at the age of 89. While obituaries mention her hits like Sincerely, the headlines belonged to Sam. She had spent decades in a gilded cage of her own making, surrounded by swan-filled moats, bulletproof glass, and a firing range in the basement. She was the precursor to the mob wives era, teaching America that innocence could be traded for notoriety. But as she sat alone in her fortress, the iron gates didn't keep the ghosts out. They locked her in with the realization that she had traded her voice for a seat at the table, only to eat alone. History is filled with such splendid prisons and silent tragedies, waiting for the right moment to be told. If you want us to continue scraping away the gloss to reveal the grit beneath, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments below. Who is another figure, saint or sinner, whose true story has been buried by time? We are ready to dig. Until next time, remember, the brightest lights often cast the darkest shadows.